Hey everyone, welcome to episode 13 of Formidable Opponents, a show that pits three people who have known each other virtually their entire lives in a series of conversations as we argue what is best in a variety of fun, engaging, and critical pop culture topics that we all debate about. I'm Randall, and with me always, Bob and Joseph. How are you guys doing?
Hey, what's up, brother?
Doing pretty good, man. How are you doing?
So today's topic is best retro video game. Before we go on with our topic, I'd like to recognize our sponsor, Cerebro Digital LLC, a digital marketing firm based out of San Antonio. They have everything from website design, social media management, and graphic design. Perfect for small businesses on a budget. Their specialty is helping start up those small businesses. So hit them up. You're thinking of starting a coffee shop or you're thinking of selling stuff online, hit them up. They'll help you out. Cerebro Digital, a better, smarter, and more affordable way of marketing. So, fellas, today we are talking about a topic that we all love, retro video games. This is not a podcast that will discuss graphics and technical specs. Picture me, at least, as a dad who just needs to know which button to press to punch because I'm not technically savvy. And we're going to talk a little bit about why are old school games still holding water today, take a trip down memory lane. And, of course, these are cherished memories that feed to our recollection of euphoric recall and the infatuation with a game that we've all connected with, or games, I should say. That bittersweet psychological nostalgia we had with every new game we got to play. Video games were an event, renting them, resetting them, cleaning them, and it makes us feel better about ourselves. Nostalgia can be very therapeutic. Video games bring people together and they bring them closer to their past. And our retro games maybe aren't as fun, creative, or innovative, but they are more important than that. They are our history. They are our memories. They are flip it to channel 3, lean the adapter on a 90-degree tilt, record the final battle on the VCR before Twitch. It's an embrace of something simple, and that's what the beauty is. They should be challenging but fun and rewarding, a time eater, and something that you can do with family and friends. And guys, tell me a little bit about your recollections and your memories of video games.
When you said that, I was immediately taken back to, as you mentioned in the beginning, we've known each other virtually our whole lives. We spent many days playing video games at your house, and I remember the damn adapter on the floor that if you touched and the game fucked up, you were getting your ass kicked.
All the time, man.
I don't know why your adapter was like that, but
I think at one point there was like a coat hanger and like a plastic radio holding it up just at the right angle.
I remember that. I remember like one time I think we were playing a baseball game, and we'll get into that later, but and somebody hit a home run and somebody tapped the adapter and the game clicked off. And we're like, "Fuck you! You lost. You didn't win." Man, I love nostalgic video games. I mean, I have Genesis and Super Nintendo emulators on my computer because I don't have those systems anymore. I love to play them though. They just remind you of, like you said, that young time in your life. And I remember I think the first console we had was the Atari. The Atari was the one with the remote with the two red buttons on the side and the one joystick, right? Yes. Yeah, I remember that one. I think I had Mad Bomber. That was a game, and Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man. And then we got
in love with Hubert.
And then we eventually got the Nintendo, and oh man, I loved playing video games. I'm the only one of the three of us that isn't married or with kids. I'm pathetic. And I still play video games to this day when I get a chance, after work on a Friday or something. But I love to go back and just remember great moments like that, like times that we played together, with the adapter, or some crazy, moment where somebody who wasn't very good at a game suddenly beat the other guy and they got mad and started raining down on them with punches, aka my brother.
Yeah, we're not gonna mention any names. Jaime.
Shout out to Jaime.
You jerk.
If you hit a home run against him, he would whoop your ass.
Well, what about you, Bob?
Oh man, I those memories are always great. Thinking back to the sports talk baseball that we played on the Genesis, or Madden football. I remember Randy even recording some of the games. I always thought that those were a lot of great times, just staying up all day or staying up all night playing video games. Another cousin of mine, Ken, who actually is a avid listener of the show, I remember him. He used to call me like at my house, like at 10 o'clock at night, already drunk. Like, hey, what are you doing? Hey, I'm going to pick you up. And then he'd come pick me up and we'd go to his house and we'd have a beer and we'd play like NHL 96 or, you know, Mortal Kombat or something, or Doom. We'd play it all fucking night. You know what I mean?
He was 12 at the time, by the way.
Yeah, he was 12. Yeah. I was a shit. I mean, I used to love video games, dude. I remember the simplicity of it where your friends from school would come over and, you know, you'd get bags of chips and Dr. Pepper and you'd stay up all night just playing video games, trying to get to the next level or trying to beat, you know, that person that's kicking everybody's ass. Man, some of the best memories I've had as a kid were just sitting around with my friends and playing games all day and laughing and joking around and just kind of spending time all together. It's crazy how as you get older, those are the simple things that you look back on.
I want to share with you guys. I don't know if you have a similar story. Maybe you could share the worst investment, but my worst investment, well, I guess it really wasn't an investment. My graduation gift for high school was a Sega CD, which was like the worst gaming system ever. I can't even remember the name. I think I had like Echo the Dolphin or some shit, you know. And my brother, who graduated 4 years before me, got a truck, so it was kind of like Ferris Bueller. Like his sister got a car and he got a computer system. Kind of the same thing that happened to me. Do you guys remember a game that you regret buying or that you were sort of subjected to play all the time and you just hated it?
It would be too hard to think about every game that I've purchased. Nowadays, I do a lot of research into a game before I even buy a game because they are so fucking expensive nowadays. I remember at the time buying a PlayStation game back in the days cost you like 20 some bucks. Now a PlayStation 4, new PlayStation 5 game is like almost $60. So I do weigh a crazy amount of research before I even buy a game, but I can't really think to myself what game I would have bought back in the days that I regretted buying. What about you, Bob?
I remember there's actually, I was thinking about this earlier and I'm going to find the picture. I know I have it. There's a picture of me like smiling as a kid because my parents got me the Nintendo NES system and it's a Christmas picture and I was in love with that thing. But I remember years later, I think I really did I own a Sega Saturn, Joseph?
I think you did.
I think I owned a Sega Saturn.
You had the Sega Saturn and Virtual Fighter.
There was like, yes. There was a one point in time where I really wanted a Sega Saturn, or maybe we just couldn't afford the badass one, so my parents got me a Sega Saturn, which is all good. And I think it came with 3 games, and then like a year later, they discontinued making games for the system.
Yeah,
so I had like baseball, Virtual Fighter, and like
Altered
Daytona
Beast.
USA driving. Like that's what it was, man. That's all it was. They stopped making games for it afterwards, but Virtual Fighter was cool. It was like a cheap Nicaraguan version of Street Fighter.
I remember we didn't pause the game very often. And Bob, I know you have a young son too. And my son has a Nintendo Switch and we would play Super Smash Bros. I'd beat him all the time. And then once he got to the point where he's like, Dad, I want to pause it so I could read how to do the moves. And we used to get like booklets that were like, we would keep these booklets with all the moves. They had like Cheeto stains and boogers and stuff. And we kept those things until the pages ripped off. So my son, he pauses the game often to study the moves. We didn't pause the game, nor did we have the instructions on the screen. Like the only time we pause the game is if we had to take a sip of Kool-Aid from a plastic cup, or we had to use a bathroom, or if a family member calls you to the living room because MTV is playing We Are the World. Those are the only times. Call back to the last episode.
Yeah. I remember writing down codes like, you know, that our friends would find out. Or I remember being like, okay, in order to beat this boss, you have to do X, Y, or Z. And I would write it down on a piece of paper or something on the little booklet or something, dude. So that way we know, like, oh, you have to do this. You have to do this in order to beat this guy. There was no fucking YouTube. There was no YouTube to give you the cheat codes. You got to figure that shit out.
And you guys grew up, we all grew up in the same area. There used to be 2 malls where we grew up. One mall was the nice mall, and the other mall was, well, you'd get shot if you were there like after 9 p.m. I think they're still showing like Police Academy 4 in the movie theater down there. I think they're a little bit behind the times. Maybe What About Bob or something?
Hey, it's only $1 to get in the movie, man. What the hell? What do you expect?
Exactly. And health insurance costs a lot more than that, though. So that cheap mall, it used to have one of the best video game areas. It was called the Nickelodeon. I don't know if you guys remember that. I used to love going to El Centro Mall just to go to Nickelodeon. You take $5, you take a whole bunch of friends, and you had loud music. You had a room full of just video games upon video games. And I think that was one of my first arcade experiences, is going to Nickelodeon and playing all these games. And I remember playing Star Wars and the WWF games. And it was just an event. And we have that now. I was talking to you guys earlier that the last conference I went to Phoenix, and I visited a place called Cobra Arcade. And the friends I was with at the time, we said, we're going to do an hour here and then we'll go to some other bar. But this place had a bar. They had loud music. They had video games. Like, all of our senses were being, I guess, tickled at that point, because we were like, we'll have a few beers and then we would not leave until we finished off The Simpsons. We were playing The Simpsons, all four of us drunk as hell, listening to old 90s music and just having a blast. What about your experiences with arcade games? I mean, arcades.
I think there's a place in Austin that we went to, the Kung Fu Saloon. It's a similar experience, a ton of retro arcade games and pinball and even skee ball and 90s or 80s music, alcohol, beer, stuff like that. Had a blast there too. I remember there was this place at South Padre Island called Jeremiah's. Do you remember
Jeremiah's? Yeah.
It was kind of like the Schlitterbahn before Schlitterbahn. Yeah, they had an arcade area down there too. I remember playing arcade video games there, and haven't thought about that in years.
They also had termites on the roller coaster plane. But that's a different story.
But that's why they closed down. I remember like Peter Piper was so huge. It was so huge because they had arcade games, a ton of arcade games in there. I think they had like the first kids would line up to play Mortal Kombat or Mortal Kombat 2 or whatever it was on the arcade. It was pretty sweet.
My first experience I can remember as far as going to an arcade type situation was the Peter Piper, the old Peter Piper on Klausner here. That's a street in our hometown.
You didn't say it correctly. Hold on. You didn't say it correctly. You're from the Valley. You guys say Peter Piper's.
Peter Piper's. It had a Ferris, not a Ferris wheel, a merry-go-round. Merry-go-round? Yeah.
They also had Bexy.
Yeah, Bexy. My pizza and Pepsi. Anyway, it had everything. It had the games. That's the experience. The earliest experience I can remember as far as an arcade. And man, yeah, a hell of a time. I loved it.
I was thinking of it right now. Actually, brought to mind my first experience of the arcade games was when I was a kid and living in McAllen. There was a Circle K down the street from my house, like literally like a block and a half. And all the kids in my neighborhood were older. I was like 6, and all the kids in my neighborhood were 11, 12 years old. And they convinced my parents, like, hey, let us take them, because I used to play football and hang out with them. And those are the neighborhood kids. We used to hang out with the neighborhood kids back in the day. That's what you did, right? They convinced my parents to let me go to the Stripes down the street at Circle K, because in the Stripes, they actually had a Street Fighter 2 arcade game. So we all collected our quarters and we all went. There was like 4 or 5 of us. We walked to Circle K and we got to play Street Fighter 2 one afternoon. It was pretty awesome.
Remember when we had Next, we'd put the quarter on the screen as like our place in line. That was cool. I remember I used to go to this grocery store called Skurlock's, and I used to, when my parents would go shopping, I'd play the video game. They had Centipede, and Centipede had that like round console. It was like a circle. You would maneuver
like a cue ball.
Yeah, it would like always pinch the shit out of me. So, I mean, I got like calluses from my hand because of Centipede. And Bob, I was going to ask you, since we have 2 kids similar age, does your son play the old school game? I know I downloaded the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo as well. My son will play for about 10 minutes and he'll get really bored with it because it's not what he's used to playing. He'll play it. He's like, it's cool. Unless it's a fighting game, he's like, he'll tune out.
Yeah, I think it was like the fighting game, because I got a couple of retro games for his Switch. Like I got old school Mega Man. I got the old school, like the Street Fighter, the special edition, we had all of them. So he'd play the old school ones. He's into it. Like I said, it has to be like the fighting games. I'm like, no, these are the ones you want to play. You don't need all that fancy shit. You know what I mean? These are the fun games. But yeah, he's into video games in general. So
before we move on, I want to throw a little shout out to, because Bob had mentioned, staying up, man, video games and just how fun they were back when we were younger, and staying up all night playing video games till like the sun came up. Just want to throw this out there, a little memory to one of our avid listeners, our good buddy Jesse. Him and our other friend Joe could not beat me and Bob in FIFA. and they wanted all night. They were like, "We're gonna beat him. We're gonna beat him." No, you're done. You can't beat us, bro. You can't beat us. The game's over.
I think we played FIFA, me and Joseph versus them two, from like 11:30 at night to like 4 a.m. because they would not let us leave. We're like, "All right, dude, it's time for bed." No,
you're never gonna beat us. You're never gonna beat us.
You brought up a couple of things that just triggered my memory. I used to play this game on Sega Genesis. It was Magic Johnson's basketball. And after every quarter, Magic Johnson would give you like a very generic coaching advice. He'd be like, if you pass the ball into the post, you'll have a higher percentage shot to score the bucket. And now when you look at Magic Johnson's tweets, they're like the same from the Magic Johnson game. He's like, if the Bulls score more than the Bucks, they might win this game. It's funny how I think he actually wrote his own dialogue for that one.
Believe the ball and throw yourself.
There was another one. I'm going to throw this in. If one of you guys could answer this, I mean, I would be amazed. I remember, I think it was us three, I want to say, we were playing this fighting game and it had a really cool soundtrack. It actually had Deftones' Minerva, and we were trying to beat some final boss, and that song was playing in the background and we could not beat that damn boss. So that song, I think we were playing it for like 3 hours straight, and we heard Minerva on loop for 3. If anybody knows, hit us up. It was a fighting game. I believe you were fighting a dragon at the end.
I know what you're talking about. I think it was a True Crime Streets of LA or True Crime Streets of New York.
You ended up being in Chinatown, and then you have to fight a dragon. Or
the thing is, how the fuck did the dragon come into play? Like, I was like, when the hell did this take a supernatural turn? Like, what the hell? Suddenly we're fighting a dragon that's shooting flames at us, and I was like, yeah, it took us forever. I don't know if we ever beat it. I don't remember, but yeah.
I'll admit, guys, and I know both of you are big Deftones fans, and you've gone to multiple concerts. I've seen them maybe once or twice. I actually with you guys.
Yeah,
I can't stand that song because we fucking heard that song for 4 straight hours. I try to put it in when I jog. I love the Deftones, and I can't listen to that song because I think we try to beat that game for like 3 or 4 straight hours just on that boss.
I remember that. I remember that.
It's dedication. Man, so let's get to our honorable mentions. Some of the games that we loved growing up playing and didn't quite make our best list or the best choice. We'll go ahead and start off with you, Bob. What are some of the honorable mention video games you got?
I mean, it's hard not to talk retro, best retro video game and not mention Super Mario Brothers. That was my first video game, obviously because it came with the console, but it was a great video game. I love Tecmo Bowl. Tecmo Bowl was just, and Super Tecmo Bowl. I love those video games. Those footballs, my first introduction to a football video game. I mean, Bo Jackson. If you haven't seen Bo Jackson in Tecmo Bowl, fucking Google that or YouTube that shit. It's awesome. Greatest athlete ever. NHL 96. Mentioned that one. You want to see Gretzky's head bleed? You want me to make Gretzky's head bleed from what was that, Swingers?
I love that scene. Yeah. Look at Mikey. Look at his head's bleeding.
I was a big fan of Doom. One that's really underrated that nobody really talks about is Castlevania. Did any of y'all play Castlevania?
Yeah.
I loved Castlevania. It was Simon Belmont fighting against the Dracula and the vampires, and I thought that game was badass. And lastly, PlayStation 1. I know this is still retro, at least for me, because I was still young, for PlayStation 1's International Track and Field. Mm-hmm. Any one of my friends who's played that with me knows that game. I own that fucking game. That was one of my favorite games to play. Still the king to this day. It'd be one against me against everybody else. I'd love that game. We just stay up all night playing that shit, dude. I loved it. But there's just so many of them. What about you, Joe? Any honorable mentions on your side?
Oh yeah, way too many to count. Over many different years and platforms. I'd be. We'd be it'd be stupid of us not to mention. Obviously, we're not out of the loop. We know Call of Duty is a great series. We know the recent ones that are released. The GTA games, big fan. We know those are all great games. We're not stupid to everything new, but so we're going to try to keep this, I guess, with a little bit retro. And PlayStation, that's about, I guess, where we mark it. Maybe PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2. But obviously, yeah, the GTA series, pretty much all of them, I love them. The Resident Evil series, these are PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 games, I know. The Metal Gear series, pretty much from PlayStation 1 and beyond, mainly to the end of Solid Snake's story arc of that game. As far as like retro games, I got one, but I'll leave it. I won't say it because I know it's going to be mentioned, and I'll just say it later when you talk about it. But General Chaos, anything Mutant League football. General Chaos was an awesome game.
Mike Tasabrica, coach.
Yeah. Mutant League football, Mutant League hockey, both of those games are awesome. I actually still have both of those games on Sega, somewhere in a box. If they're worth anything, I don't know. Sports Talk Baseball, we talked about that one earlier. One that I know we love to play, Jerry Glanville's Pigskin Football. You remember that one?
Oh,
that game was awesome. I mean, it was like medieval.
Like the fuckers could fall in the holes. And
it was medieval football, everything fantasy, not fantasy football, but like fantasy football, like trolls and goblins, I think, but knights running around with helmets and I think like you can grab an axe off the field and get into a fight with somebody and they'd end up dead. But that was a great game.
What about it reminded me of Arch Rivals. Is that like Arch Rivals, a basketball game? That one was badass. Holy crap. Go ahead.
Well, I'm curious. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
Say from downtown. What was the name of that basketball game? The one that you could type in a code and you could play with Flea. It was 2-on-2 basketball.
Oh, NBA Jam. Remember NBA Jam? You could do like different codes and play with different hidden characters. That was awesome. Clinton. Yeah. That was cool. Obviously, like you said, the Super Mario franchise and the Street Fighter franchises. I mean, way too many to mention, but some that really stood out to me. What about you, Randy?
Some of my honorable mentions: pro wrestling from NES. Love playing that. It's slow by today's standards. My son was in it for about 20 minutes, and then he was like, "Dad, this game is slow." I was like, "You know what you're talking about? We spent hours on this, and it was fun. You got to be Starman." Sonic the Hedgehog, of course, was fun. I remember one of the best days of my life was when we were trying to pass Sonic and I ended up passing it. I recorded it on VHS just to show you guys the next day. Hey, check it out. Look at the end music and everything. So that was a big thrill for me. Any of the old Madden games?
I'm sorry. I forgot to mention those. Go ahead.
Particularly the ones that had the ambulance drivers run over the players and the multiple screens. That was
Randall Cunningham, baby. That fucking guy you'd run, he would just spin in place and get all the way to the end.
Also, Double Dragon was great. Just a fun game.
Oh yeah, dude.
It sort of brought that side scroller game to more prominence. Spy Hunter. I love playing Spy Hunter. That was a game that I enjoyed. I remember at the arcade, you'd actually would sit down in this like makeshift simulator, like this car simulator, and play it. I love playing WWF Superstars, and for some reason the Big Boss Man was like the best player to have for whatever reason, and you'd have to fight Andre and Ted DiBiase. Grand Theft Auto, Vice City. There is no bigger magical moment than when you're about to save Lance and you're in a stolen Corvette and John Wade's "I Ain't Missing You" is playing. I mean, there's something just very romantic and thrilling about that. And then lastly, I know, Bob, you mentioned NHL 96. There was another hockey game I enjoyed playing. It was called Blades of Glory. Now, this game had a game within a game. So if you got into a fight, there would be like these little stamina balls. That sounds kind of funny to say, but like these stamina balls on the top, and you would fight, and you'd have to hit the guy clean 3 times. And if you knocked them out, you still went to the penalty box, but you won the fucking fight. So Blades of Glory was a cool one.
We didn't mention Duck Hunt.
Duck Hunt.
We a pretty epic night. I'd say it's super quick. I know we're going to move on.
Go ahead.
We had a pretty epic night. I think my freshman year in college or sophomore year in college, everybody was over for a party. I had everybody over. Everybody's over. Everybody's drinking. Everybody's having a good time. And I had just got one of those retro video game units, and it had Duck Hunt. We fucking stayed up. Everybody was packed in that little den room playing Duck Hunt all night to see which level, and then getting pissed off at that fucking dog that kept laughing at us. Hate that damn dog.
That game never ended.
Yeah, the game never ended.
We thought it would like, we're getting close to 100. It's got to end now. The winner of the game. No, it didn't end.
Duck Hunt is one game I didn't get to play a lot of. I didn't have the Nintendo Zapper. I got like the basic package. I didn't get like the Zapper. I never had the Power Glove either. So I was very basic with Nintendo. I was a Sega kid when I grew up. I remember buying a Sega, playing Kung Fu and playing all these other games that came along with it. and then I transitioned. Do you guys remember when we played Nintendo, one of the games we liked to play was Winter Olympics, but you had to play all the events, and then we had to play the figure skating, which we hated. We kind of really wish Tanya Harding would go out there and meet somebody because we hated playing that one. That was my best event, though. So I'm going to talk about my selection. So what I picked for the best retro video game in my choice, in my mind, I guess I should say, is Streets of Rage 2. Just a fun game. We're talking about our kids playing games. My son plays this game. He loves it, doesn't get tired of it. It was a rival to Capcom's far less superior Final Fight. Came out in 1992 for the Sega Genesis. The characters, Axel Stone, check out these names, Blaze Fielding, Max Thunder Hatchet, Eddie Skate Hunter. I mean, it's straight out of a late 80s, early 90s action movie. It was the best beat 'em up game. I love playing it. Side scroller. The music is so cool. It's very much of its time, but it's slick. It's gritty. It sounds great. The soundtrack sounded like old mixed bands like Enigma, Shaman, even Seal. Just a great soundtrack that still holds up today. And it's been 30 years. 4 young friends, rage burning inside of them, making a stand for friendship and peace was the opening marquee for that game. And the plot was that Adam Hunter from the first game, he gets kidnapped by Mr. X and his cronies, and essentially his friends are trying to clean up the streets and rescue him. Very simple plot, not too complex for anybody who's age 6 to 12. Simple, right? It was a huge critical and commercial success. GamePro gave it a perfect 5 out of 5 against the Final Fights and Super Double Dragons of the world. This was a time where these 90s action films were everywhere. Jean-Claude Van Damme, who I defended as the best action hero, regrettably so.
Say it right, puto. Say it right.
Jean-Claude Van Damme. Many critics described it as the best fighting game and best side-scroll game they ever played. Now, keep in mind, Streets of Rage was a series. I believe they've had 4 or 5 of them by now, but part 2 for something just spoke to me. To me, it's the most fun. And check out this list of enemies. You had punks, you had dominatrix, you had kickboxers, ninjas, biker thugs, wrestlers, fat guys, samurais. You had the Rocketeer. You had Bald Bull from Mike Tyson's Punch Out. You had Blanca from Street Fighter for some reason. You had the Ultimate Warrior. You had Mexican senseis, and you had Mr. X with a Tommy gun. It sounds like a Stefan skit at this point. Yeah. There's an emotional family reunion. The music kind of sounds like Everybody is a Star. It's just goosebump inducing. The helicopter coming in after everything is over, just like an 80s, 90s music trope where all the main characters that were left on the island beat all the bad guys. And of course, here come the helicopters, not to do shit, but to just pick them up. So they took every 80s and 90s testosterone trope and they used it. And it was fun. It was a side scroller. And one of the things I remember dearly is that when you were playing with a buddy and that buddy's energy was very low, and then you ate that turkey on a full energy, nobody would get you couldn't piss off anybody anymore when somebody needed that fucking turkey and then a guy with a full energy bar ate it. I love this game. It still holds up. You could play it nowadays. Like I said, I use my son as a barometer and he loves this game. He loves to play it. We play it together and I'm still into it like I was back in 1992. Fellas, what are your thoughts on this game?
I'll be honest with you. I find it hard to argue against the game, and it was actually one of my honorable mentions. For a moment, I was gonna pick it, and you picked it first, so I just kind of let it be. I do.
Like so bitter.
I remember this game very well. I still play it to this day. I always wanted to play this game. This was when you had it when we were younger. I always really wanted to play this game. Sometimes when we wanted to play. Everybody wanted to play the baseball and sports talk baseball, and I'd be like, fuck, I want to play Streets of Rage. But Streets of Rage 2 was definitely 10 times better than the first one. There was a part 3. I don't know how long after the second one. Part 3, honestly, it kind of sucked. Like I remember playing it, and I was like, it just doesn't seem as good. It seems it's more, I don't know, bright, I guess, the lighting. And we're not going to go into the whole, digital thing effects of it, but it pretty much for the entire Streets of Rage 2, it takes place overnight. I guess it just looks better. They spend a whole night, trying to clean up, the streets, like you say, and rescue their friend. You're right. It's gone up to part 4, and actually I recently started playing part 4. It's very much the same beat 'em up style, side scroll, just with like a more cartoonish drawn graphics. It looks really nice. I think I sent you a picture. I'll try to send you all a video of it later, and it's really good. There's at least 3 of the original characters from the first one come out in it. I don't want to spoil it in case you want to play it. My only argument against it is I hated that if you lost, that was it. You had to start all over from the fucking beginning. Like if you were on
reality, Joseph, that's reality.
That's life.
If you were going through, if you had a long playthrough, if you were like, because there was at least like I think 9 to 10 stages, then each stage was at least, if you played it straight through without any like real difficulty, maybe took up like 10 minutes of your time. But if you got to the last one, and if you haven't, I don't care to spoil, if you haven't played this game, oh well, it's old. But at the end, yes, you mentioned Mr. X has a Tommy gun, and he's fucking walking around and shooting you, and if he kills you, that's it. Done. You're done. You got to start from the very fucking beginning, and I hated that. I hated it so much because I wanted to win. I did win finally, I eventually beat the game. And yes, I remember the awesome scene. What's cool about that is they rescue Skates is what's his name?
His brother,
Adam's younger brother, and in part 4, actually, it's Adam's daughter is one of the playable characters.
Bad luck family.
I know, right? Like, what the hell is this family? Is just there's so much problems with them. But yeah, that's my thing. I love this game. I do. I'll still play it when I get a chance. I just fucking hated that. Like, if you lost, you had to start all over. That shit really pissed me off, man.
Or if you hit the plug at Randy's house.
Or if you hit the plug.
Don't touch that plug.
I love this game too, man. We played it a ton, obviously, at Rand's house. I had a Sega Genesis as well. We played this game a lot, like you said, what's his name? Skates. That kind of threw me off. I mean, you don't look like a badass wearing a muscle shirt and rollerblades trying to kick ass. You know what I mean? Like it did have a lot of, like Randy said, there was a lot of different characters, which is kind of cool, but it's kind of like, goddamn, who else are they going to throw at us? And they have this guy and this guy and this different type of guy. They have punks. They have big dudes. They have, and then a guy with a fucking Tommy gun, and you could be the girl and do jump kicks and shit like that. These unrealistic Jean-Claude Van Damme moves. It's a really cool game. I'll give you that. It's a really cool game. I played it a shitload. We played it a shitload. I don't know if you could say it's the best, but it's one of the really great ones. And then the great thing about it is it had the variety. The bad thing about it is it had the variety. Like I think it was just all over the place as far as characters and bad guys. And it was a little too much for that. But yeah, as far as if you lost, you started at the beginning. Well, yeah, that's just tough shit.
Beating the Ultimate Warrior one time was enough, and then he comes out later again, and the goddamn elevator is like, "What the hell are you doing here? I just beat you."
You can't look tough when you got the chick with the lead pipe, and then the dude wearing rollerblades, and you're like, "What the fuck?" So that's the only thing that throws me off about it a bit. Yeah.
They were throwing a lot of people. It was almost as if, hey, we gotta get our imagination out there because Double Dragon has, for lack of a they had prostitutes and they had all these other things, all these other people you had to fight punks. So I think they were trying to just throw everything out there. The first game did really well and they went off the power of that and they created a far superior game. And I played the other two. I don't think they're as good as Streets of Rage 2, but I mean, this game like threw it all on the table. It's like the Terminator series where Terminator 1 was great, but T2 is better than anything that came after that. And that's what I kind of like in this series too.
Why were they fighting with guys with beer bellies on a baseball field? Like, what the fuck is up with that?
Or in the swamp. It was very eerie. There was a lot of, it seems like they had too many cooks in the kitchen with all these stages. They were just everywhere, but
they had one of those floating dragon things, like that shit we tried to beat later on. Remember there's that one in the swamp, there's like a floating snake type thing. Like, what the hell?
It was just a big variety, but I think it holds up. I think you could have anybody at any age play it at this point in time. But I mean, it is fair to say, well, these side scroller beat 'em up games, they're popular with anybody because kids love them. Adults love to reenact and play them again. But I mean, I still think it stands the test of time. I haven't played video games 10 years. I had a bunch of personal goals I had to complete. And I always said, I'm going to get back to gaming. I haven't done it yet, but playing this game again and just reliving that memory of don't hit the adapter, make sure that you hand off. We used to hand off in stages because there'd be 4 or 5 of us. So it's like, okay, the best 2 guys play the hardest stages. And we used to always rotate like that in any game. And it just brings back so many memories. I love playing this game up until this day. Let's talk about your selection, Bob.
All right. Well, I went with, I know you talked about Sega Genesis. I think the Nintendo, the NES system, when it came out, I think it was probably the biggest game changer when it came to gaming. Offered hundreds and hundreds of games for for kids to play at home. And, it kind of just changed the game. My favorite game that came out in the NES, and I think it's the best video game ever, is Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out was a game I played religiously over and over and over again. I love that game. It has the sports quality to it. It has the fighting quality to it. It is just my favorite game growing up, man. I don't know what it was about it. I mean, it had a little bit of everything I'll get into in a bit. It came out in 1987 on October 18th, which is kind of a really cool coincidence. That's my son's birthday. And when I was talking about it earlier today, I was watching videos on it and just trying to get in the mode for it. My son was like, "Oh, that's Little Mac. Oh, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out." Like, he knows what it is. So I think that's pretty cool. I really did love this game, and this is not only like a favorite pick, but this is also, I think it's the best, and it's a favorite pick. So it kind of, I guess every week, a lot of times we got to separate this is my favorite whatever versus what is actually the best. Well, this one kind of toes the line and fits both for me. This game has a lot of different great qualities. I mean, it has memorable characters and opponents, King Hippo, Piston Honda, Soda Popinski, Super Macho Man, you know what I mean, Tyson, obviously, the Sandman. And the game, as any good game, it gets progressively more and more difficult to beat the next fighter every time you level up and every time you win. What's really cool about it too is that there's a trick to beating some of the boxes, right? Like when you first played, again, we going back to what we said at the beginning, there was no YouTube. There was no, let me just see on YouTube, or let me get on my phone and check Google to see how do you beat this boss. There wasn't any of that shit. You actually had to play and play and play. Then you figured it out and you're like, oh, finally, you'd figured out at 4 a.m. right? So there was always a little trick, like, having to hit King Hippo in the belly over and over again, or having to dodge Soda Popinski through those like 5 or 6 really quick hooks, and then you hit him with a super punch. I think that's really cool that it wasn't just a straightforward game, that there's these little tricks and kinks that you could do, or gaming strategies that you could use in order to win, and they weren't just as easy as just a Google away. You actually kind of had to figure it out. One thing that makes it stand out probably more than any other video game, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. The one thing it has that no other video game has, an 80s montage, baby. It has an 80s montage in the middle of it. Little Max running down the street, and they're playing that montage music in the background with his trainer riding a bike. They do it at 2 separate times in the game, having a workout montage like it's fucking Rocky or something. That makes it really great, dude.
That was cool.
The 8-bit music in the background is really, really awesome, really, really memorable. And of course, like I said, there's a bunch of iconic and really memorable characters. And then once you get to the end, it's Mike Tyson, who is just like bigger than anything at that time. He wasn't the champion yet, but he was like a few months away from becoming the champion or fighting for the belt. And so at the end of the video game, of course, you fight Mike Tyson. And I wish I could say that I won, but as a matter of fact, I've never beaten Mike Tyson. I never beat Mike Tyson. He knocked me on my ass every single time. And I never just put in the code so you can go straight to him. Like, I was a kid. I didn't know the code at the time or whatever. But every time I faced him, I lost. It's pissing me off to this day. I really do wish that I could buy a retro NES system just for this game. I love Excite Bike and Super Mario Brothers and a lot of those games that came out in the NES, but no one tops Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. I'd spend $200 or $300 on a system in just that game, just so I could have that game and play it, drink beer and play it all night. What do you guys think about it?
So I do have a few things. I was a huge Mike Tyson fan. Punch-Out came out. I was a Sega Genesis kid, and most of my friends in the 5th grade, I believe, when this came out, I was in the 5th grade. They started buying Nintendos, and I decided, wow, I got to get a Nintendo too and get in on the action. And this was one of the games that prompted me to purchase this Nintendo. And I enjoyed this game. I'm not gonna lie. If you were a kid in the late 80s or when this video game came out, and you didn't enjoy Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, something's wrong with you, because it was a fun. You didn't have to be a boxing fan to enjoy this. It had colorful characters, as you mentioned. It had a great storyline. It had the inspirational trainer. It had a pink sweatsuit. It had a bike run. It had clever quotes. It was just so much fun. Now here's Don Flamenco looked like Adam Sandler a little bit if you look at him. A lot of stereotyping in this video game. A lot of stereotyping. We had a Russian who drank. We had a Nazi German, surrender or I will conquer you, and we had a heavy set guy with a gastric bypass surgery scar that you had to punch in order to beat him. But I will tell you this. I will tell you why I didn't like this game and why I hated this game. I was the first kid in my 5th grade class to get to Tyson. I remember I was like a schoolyard legend. Like I got to Tyson and I was the last one to fucking beat him because everybody it's like that 4-minute mile. So when I beat Super Macho Man, you know, about a week or two later, people started beating Super Macho Man and they got to Tyson. And then a week or two later, the first kid beat Tyson, and then the second and third kid beat Tyson. And I was so pissed off because I could not beat. I mean, tears would be streaming like, I can't beat this motherfucker. You know, I could not beat him until finally, I think one day, like 8 months later, when everybody was long gone past the Mike Tyson. I think he might have even been in jail at the time when I finally beat him. It took handcuffs for me to finally kick his ass. It didn't recognize weight class, which I guess it's a minuscule. It's a video game, right? But Little Mac was just so tiny. I know why they made him small, so you could look over him and you could see all the characters. This is my biggest problem with this game. You couldn't beat King Hippo until you joined the Nintendo Fun Club. So I remember King Hippo was one of those boxers you got stuck on because there was a trick to beat him. You had to knock him down, and I mean, you had to knock his shorts off so he could pick up his shorts and then start punching his belly. You had to buy the Nintendo Fun Club magazine, and I remember this was back in the day where you had to, you know, send in your postage and send in your certificate and in your page and your check. I'm sorry, and it took weeks for the Nintendo Fun Club to come back, only for there to be a little square to say this is how you beat King Hippo. So it was this monopoly. It was just, you know, squeezing the last dollar bill from some of these poor kids in our neighborhood.
You just because you weren't dedicated enough to figure it out on your own, sir. That's what this is about.
Or I could have waited till some kid brought the book and it just ripped it off him, right? But I was one of the first ones to have this game, so I actually purchased the Nintendo Fun Club subscription. It was a subscription. It just wasn't a magazine, one single magazine. So those were the reasons why I didn't like the game. It was fun. It still is fun to play. I don't think it was the best. Joseph?
It's for me, it's not I don't like the game. I obviously it's one of the greatest games from one of the first systems. It's up there in the history of video games. It didn't work, and the shit that you had to try to do to get it to work because of the old cartridge system. I mean, you wanted to fucking smash that thing. If for some reason you couldn't work, you need to be there with alcohol in a cotton swab trying to. How that was going to work, I don't know.
But sanitary? Gosh, alcohol and cotton swabs, yeah.
And or like blowing air into it to try to like get all the dust out of it. God dang it. Like you, Bob, and Randy beat it. He said, like you, Bob, I never beat it. I never beat him myself. I'll be honest. I know we're probably going to get a lot of people going to come at us like, well, how can you give an opinion on a game if you've never even beat it? You know,
tell them we're 6 and 7 years old. That's why you jerk.
But and again, like I love games in general. I love games. I love playing games. I love both these games. I loved your pick, Randy. It was almost mine. I love this game too, Bob. I can't really argue against both of them. I will just tell you the things that I don't like. I know both of you are probably going to talk shit about my pick like nobody's business, but I think it was a quick game. If you can do it, because I've seen speed runs, like these people that do it on YouTube.
Oh, the world record ones. Those are actually like, pretty fucking cool.
They're
right?
fun to watch. And if you have the skills, if you've mastered it, you can run through this thing quickly. I think the world record is like 20 minutes. I saw it on YouTube. I think we watched it once. It was like you said. It was Mac was they didn't pay attention to height and weight, and why should they? It was a video game. You only had the one character. I do like that if you lost, you got to come back and try to work your way up. That was nice. It was a 2-loss game. You know, if you lost twice and it was over.
Unless you hit the adapter, they need to start all over.
Oh yeah, don't hit my adapter, man.
Nobody
could sit within 3 feet.
It used to be fucking duct tape on that shit too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, not duck hunt, duct tape.
You know, but I guess the only thing it was tough to beat Tyson. He just kicked the shit out of you. And I mentioned this. It was just briefly with Streets of Rage 2. Beating Piston Honda the first time was pretty easy. When he came at you the second time, was a little bit absurd because he was like, wait a minute, he's doing fucking shit he didn't do the first time. So you had to play
eyebrows. Watch the eyebrows. Watch the eyebrows.
Yeah, you had to play some of these characters a little bit twice, and if you had a struggle with beating him the first time, you were like, fucking shit, I got to beat this guy again. God dang it, like I just want to fight Tyson. Like Bob said, I didn't use the code, or maybe I did, but either way, I didn't win. Like after I had gotten so pissed off, I was like, I'm not gonna fucking run through these guys again, trying to beat all of them to get to Mike Tyson. I'm gonna go straight to Mike Tyson, and I still lost. Sorry.
No, you're good.
You're playing the
no. But yeah, it's a great game. Obviously, like when people talk about games, it is up there regardless of the system. It's just going to be talked about as one of the greatest games in history. One, because it was Mike Tyson, because Mike Tyson is still this huge figure today, thankfully in a better place. If you find an original copy, I think Bob had one at one point.
Yes,
a Nintendo cartridge, one of the original ones, probably worth some money, and it will be. I guess really that's my only take on it. Is it there was only one character. Great montage. Yes, Bob is one of the I love to run down the street with that in my head for like 5 hours. Dun, 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 dun. But yeah, that's my thing. Go for it.
I was gonna say I like how you mentioned the world records for the people busting through the games and not beating all the characters and beating Tyson in like record-setting time. Mm-hmm. But it's one big giant cheat code now. They have all the if I do 4 uppercuts, a duck, a dodge to the right, and another uppercut, I can knock this guy out. Like it's all written down, it's all planned out. It's all like we had to. It was all from scratch back then, which I think is better. You had to fucking learn how to beat the boss. Like in Streets of Rage with the Tommy gun, like you don't realize, you get shot twice, you're done like really quickly, and you start all over again. It's over. You have to start again. So I think that's what makes video games, especially back then, the retro games, so great. Is where you had to fucking work for it,
and we liked it. Yes,
you had to work for it. And I wish I'd beaten Tyson. I wish I'd beaten. My one regret in life. I mean, of all the regrets I have in life, I didn't fucking beat Tyson. I would love to.
It's over.
I would love. What's crazy about it is they had signed Tyson to actually a 3-year deal, and they were going to make Mike Tyson's Punch Out was huge. They're going to make a Mike Tyson's Punch Out too, but he got knocked out by Buster Douglas.
Oh, and they made a Buster Douglas video game, Sega Genesis.
He got knocked out by Buster Douglas. And they thought that his career is probably on the downswing. And then it turned out it did because of his legal troubles and shit like that. So they decided to just call it Punch Out in the next run around.
And it was not as good.
Yeah, it wasn't as good. I mean, it had a lot of similar characters. And I think Mr. Dream or somebody was the final boss, but it didn't have that, oh shit, I'm going to fight Mike Tyson now. That was fucking awesome. You know what I mean?
Do y'all remember, I think the only other named boxing game was, do y'all remember Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing?
I do.
For Sega.
Yeah. Greatest Heavyweights was way better than that one. Greatest Heavyweights was
but that's really the only other one I can remember as far as like a named boxing game. And Evander Holyfield, he was a champ at the time, and so I mean it was a decent game. Wasn't Punch Out, but it was for Sega.
Joseph, let's go on to your selection.
All right, so I went with Mortal Kombat, and Mortal Kombat 1 specifically. Obviously, this is an iconic game, an iconic franchise. Mortal Kombat itself was an arcade fighting game that was released in 1992. It was originally through the cabinet type release, like how we've mentioned at the arcade game. When we would go to arcades, we'd see. I remember the one at Peter Piper. It was this huge screen. And it had like a good like maybe 5 feet between the controllers and the screen, and it was like this huge thing. Anyway, so it was released as a arcade game first, and obviously with the success of it, it went straight to consoles like Genesis and Super Nintendo immediately. The game focused on several different characters of various intentions who enter the martial arts tournament with worldly consequences, for whoever wins, whether what side they're on as far as the battle. It introduced many key aspects of Mortal Kombat series, including the unique 5-button control scheme and gory finishing moves. Man, the fatalities, like they were like insane. It is considered one of the greatest video games of all time in the 21st century by many, and it has spawned many numerous sequels and spin-offs over the following decade. I believe even to this day, the most recent release is Mortal Kombat 11. for all the consoles, and it's still like, if you're into it, it's still really good. It's the same concept, but it's different story. So it's still, to this day, still going. Not from 1992 to 2021, I think, or 2020. Mortal Kombat 11 came out, I believe, Mortal Kombat 11 came out in 2020. As much as I love this game, I do have to mention that it also sparked numerous controversies for its depiction of extreme violence and gore using realistic digitalized graphics. I'm not going to go too into what that is, because that's not what we're here to do. But basically, it was one of the first games, I think it was one of the first games, or one of the first ones to do it right, that basically took the digital image of somebody like filmed with a real like motion camera or something and put them in the video game. So it looked like somebody was like really fighting. You weren't looking at a cartoon character or something like that. I hope that makes sense to you. This game's violence prompted the formation of the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or the ESRB, a U.S. government-backed organization that sets descriptor ratings for video games, which is still used to this day. You still see those little ratings on the bottom of any game, whether it's E for everyone, T for teen, M for mature. Basically, anything Grand Theft Auto related is, M for mature. But basically, it's this, guys. This game was the shit. I mean, I'd say for me personally, it was a fighting game. Yes, the realistic looking fighting game. I thought it was amazing. We were used to always seeing this cartoon animation stuff or 3D cartoon animation games out there. And I'm not knocking those at all. A lot of my honorable mentions are like that. But this one was something new. I remember the arcade game being up at Peter Piper, like I mentioned, the old one, with the huge screen, and always seen a constant line of kids waiting to play this arcade game. It was the arcade game, at least at the Peter Piper, was kept PG-ish. And what I mean by that was people were you weren't seeing what was later known as, the famous blood code, or ABACAB, the ABACABB. Yes, sir. That's right. ABACAB. If you were young and you shouldn't have been playing this game, it was basically entering this code at the beginning of the game. This is for the Sega console, because that's the one I played. I know it came out in Super Nintendo, but if you did this, it was you were basically giving yourself a new game, because you could play the game that you bought, only it had the fights. Only this time it had new finishing moves. But once you entered that code in, it was like a whole new ball game. The blood gushing out from the punches, kicks, Scorpion's spear hook, the iconic line, "Get over here," blood shooting out from the chest. It was crazy. It opened up new things. The finishing moves became fatalities. They weren't finishing moves. Like, if you played the version without the code, it was basically, you're just knocking somebody out, and that was it. At the famous finish 'em line, you just punch them or do some weird move, and basically they'll fall on the floor. But when you inputted this code, I mean, it became this whole new thing. They were fatalities, and they were awesome in their own right. I think the most famous one, the one that I really remember specifically, is Sub-Zero's. I mean, he'd yank your head and spine out of your body and hold it up in the air. It is what it is, or it was what it was. This game was like the AC/DC or the Twisted Sister, Motley Crue, Black Sabbath album that you had to hide as a kid because one of their songs was on the Filthy 15 list. That's a real thing, by the way. Crazy situation. Anyway, Prince was on that list. How can fucking Prince be on the filthy
sexy motherfucker?
Sexy motherfucker. Have you ever looked into his eyes?
But this was that game that if you were able to have it and you were young and you were just playing it, it was cool. But if you had that code in, it was something else, and it was like, it was new. You got to run through a tournament style thing, fight a bunch of people, but you can do that with 9 different characters. And to be honest, the soundtrack was cool. I know you mentioned the soundtrack about Streets of Rage was pretty good, but I remember I loved Goro's Lair theme on Sega, and I speak specifically of Sega because I think it was different on Super Nintendo. But I remember like popping in this game on Sega and the kickoff, man, the ding, 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 those drums, man. I was like, oh man, this is gonna be a great fucking game. But anyway, man, that was my pick, and it's because of its controversy and its longevity. I consider it one of the greatest games, if not the greatest game.
Soundtracks are very important, and I think soundtracks play a huge role in any video games, particularly the ones we mentioned today. Mortal Kombat has a distinction of the soundtrack transferring its way to nightclubs. I remember in the late 90s when that, everything sounded like a Mortal Kombat dance song, people were dressing like Raiden, and it was just a very bad era for fashion and music, or at least dance music. And that's one of the reasons why I hate this video game, because it spawned so many awful dance moves, so much awful music. I remember, like, you know, it would always sound like daggers were being thrown with electricity, and the music I never really cared for. I think it depicted the game very well. I think it painted the game very well. I just didn't like the music as a general depiction of extreme violence, using the fatalities. Right now, I was looking at the fatalities before this recording, and they look really tame compared to what goes on now. I mean, we're talking about 1992. You're absolutely right, Joseph. When this game came out, the lines were long. I mean, because you had Street Fighter, which was, of course, was drumming up all the business. And once this new sort of Kumite / Game of Death video game came on, everybody was like, what is this? This looks cool. I don't think I saw a glimpse of it until maybe a few months in, because everybody was surrounding this huge screen. I always got my ass kicked in this game. I'm not a technical video game fight player. I smash buttons, I flip arrows. I don't know how to do a fatality. I don't know how to do forward C. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. So I always got and at times it looked like an Enigma video. So it was very monk driven, very much of its time. And I was shocked that, HBO Max released a new Mortal Kombat movie, and I haven't watched it yet. But it just goes to show that we're here 30 years later, and this thing is still business. It's still making money. People are still interested in these characters: Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Raiden, etc. So it's held the test of time. If I had to argue which one of our video games is still holding the test of time, I would say it's this one, just because it's still fresh for a lot of people. It can still be transformed into very different ways, and people still love playing it. I didn't enjoy playing this video game. I much rather play the Street Fighter games. I much rather play other fighting games. Mortal Kombat never spoke to me, but I understand why it was popular. Not because of just the music, but I understand it was different. It was blood, it was violence, it was gore. And what would a teenage person want more than this? Bob, what are your thoughts?
I was going to say something, but I'll hold it. I'll keep that one to myself.
No.
Don't tease us. Yeah, man, Mortal Kombat was another big game changer when it came to to video games. And when we were younger, you know, it brought that blood aspect, which Street Fighter may have been lacking, or, you know, nobody really considered it lacking. Street Fighter 2 was the reason why fighting games that style actually became a thing, because Street Fighter 2 took over the arcade world at that point in time. So Mortal Kombat came along and said, well, yeah, we're going to give you basically Street Fighter 2 meets Bloodsport meets, you know, Big Trouble in Little China, that type of thing. And they added blood, they added the fatalities. And yeah, looking back at them, they're not so bad. But back then, you're like, holy fuck. Kano just ripped the guy's heart out, and you can see the blood. It looks like he takes a lick of it or a bite of it or whatever. You know, the pixels were really shitty back then.
It looked like a wallet, but yeah.
Yeah. I remember playing it a lot. And, you know, like Joe said, you can pick different characters. And if you had a flawless victory at a certain stage, you could fight Reptile. Do you remember that, Joe?
Yeah.
On the pit?
Yeah, that was awesome.
You'd have a flawless victory, and you had to give the guy an uppercut, and he falls to the ground, and then Reptile would appear. It was a really, really great game. I own Mortal Kombat 11 on my PS4. I just saw the movie a couple of weeks ago, and what's different about this one than the one I saw when I was a kid, the very first Mortal Kombat movie, was this one was all gore. It had a ton of gore and, you know, foul language, and it's actually kind of badass, because it's like the kids that watched the original and played the video game are now grown-ups. So they made the fucking movie for the grown-ups, not for the kids, That's awesome. Right now, not for the teenagers. It's for like us, you know, late 30s, early 40-year-olds that played the video game when we were kids and that watched the original movie. Now that we're grown-ups, like, you know, we do cuss, we do see like the gore, all that shit. Like, it was actually pretty cool to see. I saw it with my son, and I was like, oh yeah, dude, this is a little too much for you, but I was like, whatever they're saying, don't repeat those words.
I think the first Mortal Kombat movie, I think they had James Remar, who played Ajax on the Warriors. I think he was Raiden, and I think they had Veronica Vaughn. I don't know what her real name is, but she played Veronica Vaughn and Billy Madison. I think she was Katana. Is it? I don't know.
No. She was in part 1, and she was Sonya, and the other dude was Raiden in part 2.
Part 2, okay. I knew
the Raiden in part 1 was Highlander, right?
Was Highlander, bro.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no. Just correcting.
The video game itself, I thought, was great. They got better as they moved along. Mortal Kombat 2 was obviously better than Mortal Kombat 1, and I think once it hit like 4, like it was they added a plethora of characters, and it was really great, man. It's a great video game. Like I said, it introduced that little bit of violence, which I think like we were already trending in that direction to kind of give a change. The 80s video games were so like childlike and fun. And then, early 90s, the same thing. And then it kind of started evolving. I do fault it a little bit for that becoming a little too realistic and too like bloody and gory. And it seems like nowadays the video games have kind of taken after that. It's all like so realistic and so, maybe not so gory, but, bloody. If you're playing Call of Duty, getting shot and killed, right? Or blown up. I just don't. I'm not a big fan of all this realism in the video games. I love the old school retro games where you like can get lost in and play it all night, and there was something you realize you were playing a video game and not you weren't a fucking Sims character, right? In the game. So that's my only fault with it. I love the game. It was a great little step up to Street Fighter, give it that competition. But that's all I have to say. If personally me growing up, my retro games, the games I liked the more. Maybe the more, I don't want to say cartoonish, but more cartoonish video games like the Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, like the Zeldas, like the Streets of Rage, that type of thing.
What about you, Joseph? You're an avid gamer. Obviously, the games now are more competitive. The graphics are obviously better. The sound's obviously better. But comparing to what you do or what you play now, comparing to what we played growing up, I mean, how does it compare? I mean, is it something special? Do you feel like you're experiencing something cool when you're playing a video game nowadays?
I do, and I'll use a newer game. It's not super new. I'll use Red Dead Redemption 2. I think this is one of the greatest games ever made, most recently. When I think about what game I'm going to buy or whenever, and I do these researches, I need to know, if the game is story based, is it a good story? If it's a sports game, is it challenging? Did I feel like I got my money's worth? And I did feel like that I got my money's worth when I played Red Dead Redemption 2. I mean, it was nowadays like games like this, and I guess the difference, and there's always going to be games that are similar to the stuff that we talked about, the retro games. But I guess now these more story driven games, this epic journey that you go through with the character in Red Dead Redemption 2, Arthur Morgan is his name. I'm not going to give the story away of him. I won't. I know it's been a while, but it's fucking hard. When the game ended, I was like, Jesus, like, wow. That was a journey.
What do I do now?
Like what do I do now?
I think that's one point I wanted to make, and it's kind of like you said, it's a journey, and on the Red Dead Redemption, you can just travel around and check out all these parts. In Call of Duty, you can play so many different game modes. The game is never ending, which I think it's great for the game. But I think we lived in a different era or a different decade back in the late 80s or in the 80s and early 90s. It was like, okay, cool, you beat Tyson's Punch-Out. Yeah, now we can go outside and fucking play.
That's true.
Like the kids nowadays are like, well, why would I go outside and play when I have, I can play Call of Duty until 8 a.m. You know what I mean? And I think that there has to be like an ending to it or a cutoff to it. So maybe I'm alone on this, but like I appreciated that back then, that you could play a football game. I mean, granted, you can still do that with Madden, but the games felt like, okay, or if you fucking hit that adapter or you lost and it started all over, you're like, all right, fuck this, I'm turning this off and I'm gonna go do something else for a while.
Or remember how we had to let the game rest because we would touch the side of it. You're like, hey, we gotta let it rest. We would use that verb.
Let's go outside and play basketball for a bit. Yeah, we would actually do this. Yeah, so you're right. We would go do that, Bob. You're right. Yeah,
so I mean, like it's not dissing any of the new games, man. I loved Call of Duty and Red Dead Redemption is a badass game, but I feel like that you went out and did shit too. You didn't just play video games, to all hours of the night. You did, but you also did other shit. You know what I mean? That there was a stopping point. And I feel like nowadays, like people get lost in all these type of games when, the Sims type of games and the World of Warcrafts and the Call of Duties and the Grand Theft Autos, which are all fucking badass games. But like you get lost in them. You continue to play them. You play them morning, afternoon, and night, and you kind of don't do anything else. At least some people don't. So that's my only knock on those type of games, that there's got to be a certain level where you're like, all right, I'm going to turn this off for a while. I'm going to go do some other shit and I'll come back and I'm going to beat this guy when I come back. I always thought that's kind of cool.
I see your point.
They use that in tropes too. I was watching the Mighty Ducks series. It's actually a really good series. Check it out. If we talk about retro stuff here, the Disney Mighty Ducks.
Does it really have a mustache?
Does who?
Emilio, does he have his mustache?
He does. He looks pretty good.
I'm in. If he's wearing the mustache, I'm in.
It's actually really well written. My son binge watched it. I watched a couple of episodes with him, and there's a character in the movie. They're trying to find a goalie, and they're playing a hockey game online, and they're talking to this kid, and this kid can't score on him. So we got to find this kid, and he's a heavy set kid, and he's on a lazy boy recliner, and he's playing with like all these screens, and he's just playing video games all day. And they're like, your skills can transfer onto the ice. Like, no, I just play video games all day. They start throwing shit at him. He starts blocking it, like putting down the control. He doesn't even put down the control, but he just starts. And I'm like, that's kind of like the joke where kids don't do something active. And it's funny because I think about Back to the Future too. And there's a scene where Marty McFly, he's at the 80s cafe and he starts playing the gun game. And Elijah Wood, who's a child actor at the time, tells him that game's for babies. And it's kind of like what we're experiencing now is that games are so different. It's like you could play them endlessly. I know I was going to go off on another point after this. I don't remember it, but maybe I'll catch it. But you could play them endlessly and you could just sit there for hours on end where we would play Sports Talk Baseball or we would play, King of the Ring or anything else. And we would like say, hey, let's pause it here or let's play a different game where the focus now is just like, let's just play this one game until we beat it, where we just juggle games back in the day. And before we end this podcast, guys, I want to ask you guys biggest video game accomplishment you had and most frustrating. I'll start off first. My biggest accomplishment, I've already mentioned it, is beating Mike Tyson. I think if anybody could beat Mike Tyson, I mean, I was in buckets of sweat after finally beating him. I felt like I really did fight Mike Tyson. Only I had my ears intact. And then I would say my most frustrating video game moments, it's not one particular moment. Hogan's Alley. Anytime you would get really far in Hogan's Alley and they start flipping it, like it would be like the mom with a baby or the old lady and you try to shoot the criminal, I would always get frustrated because I would always end up shooting like a civilian instead of one of the criminals. So that was my frustration. What about you guys? Biggest accomplishment, most frustrating video game moments?
Well, okay, so they're one and the same. Biggest, most frustrating? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Most frustrating moment. There is a mission in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas where you got to take out some drug delivery drivers via a little RC plane that the character is voiced by David Cross, he's the guy with the glasses, right? Yeah. So basically, instead of going out in normal GTA fashion and just finding them, in a car or a bike and taking them out, you have to fly a little freaking RC plane. The thing is, the RC plane runs out of fuel and you got to fly this plane around a goddamn city and they're scattered out. There's like 3 or 4 of them and you got to somehow take them out and for some reason land the plane back. I don't know why, but for so long I couldn't do it. I couldn't fucking complete this mission and it was so frustrating. I hated David Cross. I was like, fuck this guy, fuck him and your stupid mission. The good thing about it was a side type mission and it didn't really it didn't have to be completed to finish the main story, which I didn't realize until after I had beaten the game and I was like, wait, I never finished that mission. Greatest achievement, finally beating that fucking mission. But the thing is, once
Charlie Murphy in the face.
The thing is, once you completed that mission, it opened up the rest of the side thing, and you got to do that, and I felt happy about beating it. But one in the same, greatest achievement and most frustrating, all in one. How about you, Bob?
The biggest disappointment. I'm trying to think of it. I know I got lost in Zelda a couple of times. I was like, fuck this game. Because I couldn't figure out where to go. Mega Man. I remember Mega Man 2, I believe it was. Mega Man 2, it's because I bought this little collection of all the Mega Man games for Ryan's Nintendo Switch. And I was like, yeah, dude, I used to play these all the time when I was a kid. And I picked it up. And I was playing like Mega Man 2, and there's one stage I was like, dude, I can't beat this fucking boss. And I was like, yeah, well, maybe I'll just go to the other boss. And I couldn't beat that fucking boss either. So that game was probably my most frustrating. Not being able to beat Mike Tyson and Mike Tyson's Punch-Out is definitely up there. Biggest accomplishment. That's saying a lot, man. I was trying to think of it. The biggest accomplishment I could say is I'm going to go back to it, and only my close buddies, the ones that listen to it, they'd understand. Being the Tara king of international track and field. If you don't know what that means, is in international track and field, you have to be able to tap on the X and the O button, like not hugs and kisses, the X and the O button as quickly as possible. So you can haul ass when you're running, when you're swimming, when you're about to do pole vault. So what we used to do, we used to pair up. So, one guy we'd pair up. So like, Joseph and Danny would have a controller, and Joseph would hit X and Danny would hit O. Jesse and Rico would have the other one. They'd be tapping it, and then you have to hit X when you want to jump or you want to throw the shot put, or after you build enough speed, or if it was swimming, you'd have to keep hitting the buttons. I would fucking kill at that. I'd never needed a partner. I'd always go and I would always haul ass and get the world record in like the 100-yard sprint or the 200-meter swimming event or whatever. And I killed at that game. So that's probably my only big accomplishment when it comes to video games.
And just a ton of memories. I remember how we used to tease each other. Like if we'd miss a field goal in Madden and Madden introduced the instant replay, we would replay the fuck out of the missed field goal. Look at, you just missed it by 4 inches. And it was a very frustrating time, but I mean, it was a very fun time too. And man, those memories stick with me for so long. I can only hope that my kid has as many great memories with video games as I think we all did. And it was just a great time. And I think the best memories I had playing video games with you two guys. And it was just a fun time. Those were a great era, but that's our show. Listeners, we'd like to hear from you. What is your favorite retro video game? Most importantly, let us know what you think about the show. You may reach us at formidableopponents@gmail.com and follow us on Twitter at FOpponents. And you could also follow us on Instagram at formidable_opponents. Next week, join us as we argue best in 90s sitcom. It's going to be a great one. Hope to see you all there next week. And for Bob and Joseph, this is Randall, and we'll see y'all next time.
Later, King lives.